The room is already hushed. The fans keep a low breath, steady as tide in a bottle. A red diode winks in patient rhythm, and somewhere far outside, the sky holds its posture. The chair settles under me, leather remembering its shape, while the monitor dims to a soft grey, meant for night eyes. In this quiet, I keep you close, as if we were sharing one long, unbroken inhale. If you can, place the phone on Do Not Disturb and loosen the shoulders you don't know you're holding. Headphones help. Let the volume sit just below thought. If you're driving or doing anything that needs your full attention, save this for later and rejoin the playlist when you're safe. This is meant for resting minds, for slow curiosity that doesn't ask you to choose between wonder and sleep. Somewhere on the log screen, a line waits for the night's first entry. At 02:14 UTC, it will accept a simple note about a faint traveller, and the place we last saw it pause against the field. Until then, we let the dark do its work. The field looks empty at first, as most honest things do. We will trace a path through it, not to chase alarms, but to keep company with a visitor that answers to light and patience. Settle the breath. The story will move slowly, the way a dim halo thickens when your eyes grow kind to it. I will speak in even lines, and together we will follow a thread that never needs to tug. We are ready. Begin with the dim star just left of center and let your gaze slide a finger's width to the right. In that slow motion, a softer brightness lingers, not quite star-like, a smear that holds its shape. It is quiet light, the kind that prefers patience to applause. Follow its edge. The halo is faint and even, and the field around it stays honest, dotted with points that do not move in the minutes we watch. Where contrast relaxes, form reveals itself. The quiet halo waits. Now let the eye return to the frame. A thin grid of coordinates hums beneath everything we see, and the night makes room for one visitor that does not belong to our family of ellipses. Its path is open, more than open, as if the curve loosened so far it will never close again. This is what a hyperbola looks like when translated into light on a sensor. It is not a symbol of drama. It is a simple declaration that the sun will not keep it. Detection came from a watchful pair of telescopes in Hawaii, patient machines trained to notice movement where the rest of us would swear there is none. The survey is called Atlas, and it doesn't chase headlines. It scans, compares, and measures night after night. A faint source shifted across sequential frames, and the math that follows discovery did its work. Orbital elements grew from the numbers. Eccentricity stepped past 1. The label followed. Third interstellar object, Atlas the Discoverer. Names do not make the light true. They only help us keep track of it. We can think of velocity without making it fast in our language. Compared with the sun, the motion is enough to clear escape, and enough to carry this glow through our neighborhood once, and only once. Its angle to the plane of familiar planets is high, like a beam coming through a slightly open door from a different hallway. None of that asks for worry. It asks for care. We trace the curve with calm hands, noting where the brightness swells near the side that faces daylight, and where a thin tail begins to suggest itself in the anti-solar direction. The quiet halo gathers a little thickness as it warms. Let's pause together, and let the room be a room. There is the mild breath of the fan, a soft rectangle of monitor glow on the desk wood. Outside, a single insect tries the window once and gives up. My notes keep their place without asking for more ink. You can let your shoulders drop again. Nothing is in a hurry. The halo remains where we left it, a patient bloom on the screen while the clock learns another minute. In that small stillness, the mind smooths until light is simply light, and the page becomes wide enough to carry it. Return to the scene and let the line of motion emerge from comparison, not from will. The first nights answered the easy questions. Not a star, not a catalogued asteroid, not a returning comet. The next nights answered the better ones. Does it grow a coma? Does the brightness vary with a rhythm that might be spin? Does the tail hold the anti-solar line? Telescopes with larger mirrors confirmed the delicate envelope. Gas and dust released as sunlight works a steady chemistry at the surface. Nothing theatrical, only the slow physics of ice's meeting heat and the scatter of small grains that push the glow into a feathered shape. What Interstellar means, here and now, is simple. The object wasn't born from the same cold nursery that gave us our distant comet reservoirs. Its star was another star, and the gravity that once held it was not ours. Long before these nights, something in that far system nudged it outward, a patient sequence of encounters adding enough energy to unbind it. Millions of years later, a small fraction of those steps reach us as a luminous trace on a sensor and a column of numbers in a log. We will not know the biography in detail, and we do not need it to keep the watch. Each measurement is an act of courtesy. The quiet halo answers with more to notice. From the model we bring to the sky, we learn how to look. A hyperbolic orbit tells us this curve will tighten, turn at perihelion, and then relax outward, the flux of sunlight easing with distance. The coma may soften again. The small, steady acceleration produced by outgassing will make itself known as a difference between where gravity alone would have placed it and where it actually appears. When the difference is subtle and repeated, models add a small term and predictions improve. That is not a plot twist. It is housekeeping, the kind that makes ephemerides kinder to telescopes that have to point by the clock. In that housework, the halo remains our subject. Community builds around such a traveller. A network of eyes spreads across longitudes, so the gaps between nights get smaller. Northern sights trade with southern. Large mirrors confirm what small ones suggest. The data flow to the center that keeps the book for these bodies, and the book updates as facts earn their lines. When someone on a mountain sees a change in the glow or a fine spray that hints at a jet, others test it, and the glow either keeps the story or lets it go. This is how the quiet halo ends up with a history we can read, page by patient page, without ever lifting our voice. Before we step away, let the eye rest again on the smudge that started this. Hear how the light has no sound of its own, and yet fills the room with a kind of calm persistence. Call it a visitor, if you like, but not to make it a voyage, only to remind us that our field can hold strangers without turning them into alarms. On the screen, the faint envelope softens from white to a thin green hint, then toward a cooler blue at the edge where sensor noise lives, and the scene exhale dissolves like a wash of colour left to dry. The camera clocks with a red blink, a quiet metronome for the dark. Guiding holds a thin line steady, and the mount hums at a pitch that feels like a hand on the shoulder. The shutter gives it soft cloth sound, open, wait, close, and the cooler whispers back with its measured chill. Numbers arrive in the rhythm of this room, each a footstep on padded floors. The low ticking gathers into confidence. Plate solving comes first. The field is threaded with catalogue stars, and the software matches patterns the way the ear matches beats. Centroids settle to thousandths of a pixel. Right ascensions drift into their places. Declinations agree. I tag the mid-exposure time in coordinated universal time, note air mass and seeing, and let the solution anchor itself to Gaia's reference frame. The image scale is quiet, the distortion map flatter than last week, and the uncertainty shrinks as if the room itself were leaning closer to listen. Now, photometry. I set a modest aperture, then test a PE fit, watching the residual ring fade. Comparison stars carry calibrated magnitudes, and transforms nudge our instrumental counts to a standard band, so the light can be compared across nights without argument. A handful of frames are stacked. The signal rises while the noise learns to cancel, a small kindness earned by patience. The curve that follows is undramatic and useful, a brightness that thickens with solar warmth, a hint of rotation, in slow, shallow undulations that never need more than a pencil line to describe. The low ticking approves. Astrometry returns for its second bow. I step through the residuals, observed minus computed, and let a scatter of arc seconds tell its story. Tonight, they are small and even, like the soft scuff of shoes on carpet. And yet, when set against a week of nights, there is a persuasion in the persistence. The kind of persuasion that does not raise its voice, but keeps returning to the same syllable until maps begin to bend their lines, and predictions agree that a tiny, steady push rides with the glow where chemistry meets sunlight, and the room answers only by breathing. The spectrograph waits with its own ritual. A lamp clicks on. Calibration lines take their places. A flat frame smooths the path. I slide a slit to greet the coma and test dispersions that will keep the bands unhurried on the sensor. Later, when the sky is fully settled, the gas will speak in signatures. Cyanogen here, a page of carbon there, and a quiet oxygen line that sometimes sketches the faintest accent at the edge of green. None of this is theatre. It is the sound of a method, each note patient, each silence allowed to be silence. Between exposures, I record what the room knows, the temperature of the CCD, the state of the guider, the small drift that grades to zero after a nudge. I enter the observer's comment in plain words, no superlatives, no ornament, just the seeing, the transparency, the air mass climbing down as the target climbs up. When the sequence closes, I package astrometry in the format the center prefers, the commas and uncertainties exactly where they belong, and send the set along the quiet path to the people who keep the book. The low ticking keeps time, while the connection carries what the night has given. Responses ripple in their own gentle schedule. Predictors at distant desks fold these points into fits, post new elements, and whisper to our telescopes where to point next. An electronic circular will appear when it must, and not before, carrying updates that feel less like announcements and more like clean pages placed on a clipboard. This is the tempo that spares us all from hurry. Observers south of here trade their logs with those north, and the gaps between nights become shorter, the curve smoother, the chorus of ticks wider and more sure. Any small claim has to pass through this hum, repeatable, independent, modest. I listen for the mistakes I can correct now, a dust mote I can blow from the filter wheel, a misentered comparison star I can replace, a guiding aggressiveness I can dial down so the trace breathes instead of twitches. The goal is not perfection. The goal is kindness to the numbers, so that when a faint non-gravitational term peeks through, it does so without the noise of our own hands. The low ticking slows with me, as if the room were nodding. By the end of the run, we have what the sky would give, positions that sit comfortably inside their errors, magnitudes that hold a trend, a spectrum that may earn a label later when more nights agree. I close the dome slit a span, listen for the change in wind, and write a last line for the log. Not everything belongs to tonight. Some discoveries arrive only after the ticks have been averaged and the breaths made even. The instruments understand this and say so in their own language. The shutter answers with a final soft reply, a small promise held in metal and time. The spectrograph ticks once. What nudges a traveller that should answer only to the sun's pull? A small push from its own breath, I would say, the way a journey changes when a pocket wind rises along the road. That is all we mean by the phrase that sounds larger than it is, non-gravitational acceleration. Not a break with the map of physics, only an extra step added to the itinerary when ice warms, turns to gas, and leaves with enough intention to lean the path a little. The slight nudge. If gravity writes the main route, then chemistry writes the margin notes that guide a turn or two. Gas escapes from sunlit seams, and because every action has an answer, the body gains a gentle recoil. Photons press on dust as well, though their push is better felt by grains than by the dense core. Over nights and weeks, those tiny course corrections add up, and when we compare where the traveller is to where the pure gravity timetable expected it to be, we find a difference that repeats. A footstep out of line, then another in the same direction, until the trail itself accepts the change. I think of another visitor we once followed, a smaller one that carried no visible plume. We called it the first of its kind because it came from a distant neighbourhood and would not return, and we watched its route slide a little off the chart despite the lack of a clear spray. The debates were long, sometimes louder than the object's own faintness deserved, yet the core idea remained quiet and simple. There was a persistent offset, best explained by a small force native to the traveller, not by a planet's tug or a missed mass. That lesson sits in the kit now, like a well-worn compass. The slight nudge. Then came the second, and it behaved like a familiar wanderer from our own deep stores. A bright coma, an honest tale, and a route that needed no extra terms beyond the ones we keep ready for comets. It was a reassurance, not because it erased the earlier puzzle, but because it reminded us that journeys can differ without leaving the road. When gas is plainly at work, the math and the map agree more quickly. The footnotes match the steps. Even that comfort has value on long nights. With this third traveller, we walk between those memories. We see the envelope of activity in repeated images, and we also see residuals, small, steady differences between the observed path and the gravity-only route, the kind that make orbit fitters lift their heads and sharpen their pencils. Any claim must pass the usual gates, consistent across instruments, stable across weather, careful with the times and the stars used to anchor the field. When those checks hold, we add a term to the equations that lets the path lean as outgassing would make it lean, and we watch whether the future positions land closer to the center of their tiny circles. The journey becomes easier to follow when the model walks at the same pace as the traveller. If gas leaves unevenly, it also twists. A jet from one face can give the whole body a faint torque, changing the angle of the spin, which changes which seam faces the sun and when, and that alters the direction of the push in a cycle we can trace if the light rises and falls with a shy rhythm. Season can matter too, not in a weather sense, but as geometry. A tilted axis means one hemisphere receives more day than the other during certain arcs, and so the activity favors that side of the route. Over weeks, the traveller's steps tell the story one small bend at a time, the slight nudge. Sometimes people ask whether the wind of the sun itself or the pressure of light alone could drive the journey in ways we haven't accounted for. Light can push, and does, but its hand is gentlest on the finest dust and weakest on the compact core. The road of the nucleus is not easily turned by that alone. The solar breeze fills the space between worlds with charged particles, yet its sway on a multi-kilometer body's center of mass is too slight to run the route. We keep those terms in the book, and we use them where they belong, on grains that make the tail, on arcs where dust dominates the view, while the main traveller answers mostly to gravity plus its own breath. Errors can masquerade as detours. That is why we check the clock, the plate scale, the catalogue we solve against, and the way the atmosphere swells and thins above our optics. A consistent nudge that survives those tests earns the dignity of a physical cause. When it does, we do not make a parade of it. We enter a small constant into the route plan, sometimes with direction components that reflect how the jets likely lean with respect to the sun, and then we keep walking beside the path to see whether the milestones agree. The work is not a chase, it is an escorted stroll. There is a comfort in how modest these adjustments are. The traveller is not jumping fences or taking secret corridors. It is just accepting a shoulder tap from its own leaving air. In the second half of its approach, as heat seeps deeper and new seams open like old zippers, the push may strengthen, and then, after the turn near the sun, it may soften again as the day grows weaker and the path lengthens out toward the quiet between stars. Through it all, the journey stays legible, because we write the margins as carefully as we read the main line, trusting that a road can include both the map and the footprints without contradiction. Out at the edge of the run, I picture the route like a string held lightly between two fingers, gravity pulling from one hand while chemistry tugs from the other, and the string finds a new angle that is still a straight path from where it stands. The traveller does not argue, it simply goes on, and we match our stride to its pace so the notes we keep remain companionable rather than breathless. The slight nudge. If that is the rule for how a journey explains itself, main pull, small self-push, careful walking by those who watch. What else really? should we ask of a visitor that was never promised to us? At 02:14 UTC, the log accepts its pale numeral, and the night tightens into a single square of sky. The screen holds a field so calm that even the noise seems to obey, faint salt on dark cloth. I write the time with a slow hand, and let the mark glow just enough to be seen, not enough to wake the room. A postcard of light from a precise minute, carried by a patient instrument and a steadier breath. The pale numeral keeps its watch. The coordinates come next, not as a flourish, but as a quiet grid the eye learns to trust. Star points form triplets and trapezoids the software knows by heart, and the field settles against a reference sky that does not drift. I place the centroid where the blush of the coma rises above the background, then confirm that the scale and rotation hold. Even without reading the numbers aloud, I can feel them click into place like gentle teeth on a well-made gear. The pale numeral waits at the top of the page and does not rush the rest. Brightness speaks in careful increments. Across a handful of nights, the curve lifts a little, not as a flare, but as a steady climb that matches the traveller's slow approach to warmth. A hint of rhythm rides on the trend, as if a turn of the body lets one seam face daylight and then another, the light answering with a shallow, honest wave. No boasts, no leaps, only the kind of growth that rewards the habit of returning to the same place at the same hour. The pale numeral becomes a small lighthouse for these modest tides of light. Clarity in the air helps the ink tell the truth. Stars hold their shapes, round and temperate, and the horizon's burden is lighter than last week. The target climbs. The thickness of atmosphere it must look through thins, and the field sharpens without ever needing to be called sharp. When the breeze moves, it does so above us, where it can do no harm to the frame. When it rests, the points become pins pressed gently into velvet. The pale numeral keeps the moment fixed, while the world beneath the dome remembers to be still. I visit the residuals with an unhurried step. Observed against computed, one by one, each offset is small enough to whisper and stable enough to matter, and laid. Across nights it makes a quiet case for adding a breath term to the route. The map shifts a fraction toward where the traveller actually is, and tomorrow's prediction narrows until the next postcard can land closer to centre. Not a plot, not a twist, only the soft practice of acknowledging where light insists on being. The pale numeral at the top of the page seems to nod. There is a moment I save for the end of a run, a still minute long enough to feel like glass cooling. I lower the room lights until the keyboard becomes a shoreline and the monitor a small, private dawn. The field brightens just to the edge of comfort, and the faint envelope around the nucleus shows its texture, a cottony gradient that leans away from the sun and thins toward the sensor's patient dark, while the surrounding stars hold their absolute poise, and the entire scene from corner to corner settles into an evenness so complete that time itself seems to slow into the light it is naming. Nothing about this minute asks to be dramatic. The traveller's path remains legible. The tail keeps the anti-solar line like a fine pencil stroke. The coma's edge is round on one side and feathered on the other, a small geography carved by radiance and release. I do not reach for comparisons. I only let the image be an image, because in that restraint the details come forward of their own accord, and the record earns the right to be read again by other eyes. the pale numeral keeps its soft vigil. Before I close, I copy the essentials into the night's book and leave a line for the next observer, a gentle thread that binds one watch to another without tugging. If the object's brightness swells again, we will see it in the slope. If its position leans further from the gravity-only map, the fit will ask for a slightly larger breath term, and we will oblige. If nothing changes at all, that stillness will be its own quiet result. I rest the pen beside the pad and let the minute lock in place. At 02:14, the room remembers how to breathe. The room holds a low hush that seems to rhyme with space. Fans murmur under the bench, the mount breathes in a faint mechanical sigh, and somewhere beyond the dome the solar wind unspools without sound, a current we feel only in the way dust learns to drift. Cables rest without argument. The spectrograph coolers whisper their small, tireless weather. I set my palms flat on the desk and let the quiet settle until even the clock's second hand feels like a soft brush on paper. The low hush gathers. A coma is how silence looks when ice meets daylight. Molecules loosen from the surface and push into a tentative crowd. Collisions turn a tight exhale into a soft envelope that grows more spacious as it escapes. Dust rides with the gas and makes the envelope visible, a kind of auditory blur for the eyes, as if the glow could carry its own whisper wherever sunlight plays. Close to the core, motion is every which way, because bumps are frequent. Farther out, the crowd thins and directions start to agree. The low hush becomes a shape we can trace with patient exposures. Then the tails take their cue. Dust, heavier than gas yet light enough to be pressed by sunlight, drifts into a broad, curved ribbon that leans away from the sun, an answer to radiation's steady hand that grows softer with distance. Gas, stripped and steered by fields in the flowing plasma, can draw a straighter, narrower line that points more directly downwind, and on some nights the two voices weave together, the wide dust murmur and the slimmer ion thread, each aligned by a different conductor. Instruments that watch the star itself report how quick and dense that wind is, so our ears know what sort of breath the coma meets on any given night. The low hush holds both parts in one patient chord. Chemistry writes its notes across the glow. In the near violet, a raspy brightness from CN answers the sun. Greenwood, carbon bands paint a softer timbre, while oxygen can add a faint, clear tone near the edge of sight. And water's children, once freed by light, add to the chorus as they break and sing again, so that the coma we photograph is not just brightness, but a score of small responses whose volume rises and falls with distance from the star, rotation of the nucleus, and the way a jet can swing a microphone past our line of hearing if the spin brings it into day for a moment and then hides it once more behind night on the tiny turning world. Jets complicate the rhythm without breaking it. A seam warms first, gives a narrow spray, and that narrow spray nudges the whole body with a soft tap that can tilt the spin or make it wobble in a slow, readable way. As the angle changes, different seams take their turn. The push swivels, and the dust released at 1 hour lays a different arc than dust released the next. Sometimes a crust breaks and a quick flourish plays, a small, short outburst that fattens the coma for a night and then quiets again. The fitters hear these changes in the data as a beat that doesn't quite match a straight metronome, and they add a gentle syncopation to their models so the predictions listen better to the sky. The low hush accepts the added pulse and goes on. Stay with the sound for a minute. Not facts now, only the feel. A breath under the desk, steady and cool. A thinner breath slipping past the dome slit. The slow, even click of a relay settling after an exposure. Outside, a wind you will never hear. Touches dust that will never know your name, and the dust bends its path by an amount too small for any ear, yet large enough for the camera's patience. The spectrograph rests like a sleeping instrument between takes. The guider's numbers drift by with the calm of rain on a roof. Far out, where silence is the whole weather, ions follow lines through a field that hums without air, and a curve of dust makes its broad answer to light's pressure. I do not move. I let the room keep time, and the low hush keeps it with me. A long, even tale of quiet that fades no faster than a slow breath leaving the chest. Begin close. Imagine a single grain easing free from the surface, as if stepping off a threshold onto an old road. It is smaller than a blink can hold, yet it carries choices. How quickly to fall behind the nucleus, how far to be pressed by light, how long to stay in the traveller's company before the path widens. It lifts with the gas, pauses as collisions thin, and then lets the sun suggest a direction. In that tiny departure the journey starts, and already the map is larger than the grain knows. The widening arc begins. Now give the grain a rule to walk by. Gravity wants it near, but radiation offers a gentle, steady push that grows stronger as the grain grows smaller. We give that trade a name that behaves like a ratio. How much light can sway a particle compared with how much mass can tie it down? And from that simple measure, we can guess which grains will lag like stones, and which will sweep outward like travellers eager to pass the caravan. Small ones take longer steps under light's persuasion. Larger ones keep to the slower lane near the core. Over hours, those choices sketch a road that bends away from the sun with a grace you can read in long exposures. The widening arc keeps its measure. Brightness, too, follows a road. The way dust scatters sunlight depends on the angle between sun, traveller, and us, and the curve of that dependence becomes the quiet grammar of comet light. Near some angles the glare softens, near others the glow rises, as if the road were briefly pointed our way. Night by night, we fold those angles into our expectations. So the lift in the curve is not mistaken for a sudden change in the traveller's health, but recognized as a familiar stretch where the path aligns and the view grows friendlier. This is not drama. It is the way the journey looks from where we walk. To compare one night's road with another, we borrow a standard from long practice. We measure the dust's reflectivity, the fraction of sunlight it returns, and we fold in the size of the patch of sky our aperture gathers, building a quantity that stays steady when the coma follows a classic fall-off with distance from the nucleus. Think of it as a mile marker that holds its value even as the scenery changes. Let in observers in different towns compare notes without arguing over how wide their windows were. When that marker grows, we say the road is busier with dust. When it rests, we say the pace has not changed. The widening arc gains context. Colour tells us about travellers within the journey. Dust often reflects a touch redder than the sun itself, a sign that larger or darker grains ride in the flow, though exceptions remind us not to force a single rule upon a crowded road. We test this with pairs of filters, one a little bluer, one a little redder, and let the difference speak with quiet authority. If the path leans toward red, we picture more robust grains keeping step. If it leans toward neutral, we allow that smaller motes or fresher surfaces may be playing a larger role. Across many nights, we gather these small colour steps, and the route reveals which travellers dominate the procession without asking us to see them individually. Jets explain how some travellers get their first momentum. Gas leaves along seams and carries grains with it, lifting the smallest first and the largest last, so the spray itself becomes a local road, whose direction rotates with the nucleus, and whose strength swells when sunlight stares a little longer into that seam. Close by, grains share the gas flow. Farther out, they decouple and choose for themselves, according to size and weight. Images sometimes catch these narrow roads as thin fans within the broader plume, a reminder that a journey can contain smaller journeys, each time to the turn of the body and the slow seasons written into its tilt. Watch long enough, and those fans trace their own arcs across the frame, readable as a diary of where the seams woke and slept. Step back now. The swarm of grains resolves into a tail that bends, a coma that rounds, and a nucleus that keeps its appointment with a path set long ago. The orbit itself is an open road, more than a loop, less than a straight line, curved by the sun, and then release back to the wide lanes between stars. Elements we list in tidy tables become scenery. A closest approach to daylight somewhere ahead, a tilt that brings the traveller across our plane at a slant, a speed high enough that only a single visit belongs to us. When models include a small extra push from the leaving gases, the predicted milestones along this road move closer to where our next measurement will actually meet them, and the whole march of nights feels less like chasing and more like walking alongside a friend who keeps a steady pace. In that shared stride, the widening arc is easiest to follow. Hold the wide and the close together for one last minute. A grain learns its steps from light and mass, from the tug it cannot refuse, and the encouragement it cannot ignore, and a jet can loan it a quick start that slowly diffuses into the general traffic. The collective of those grains writes the tale we photograph, and the entire cloud answers, in turn, to the curve the sun demands as the object makes its single pass through our neighbourhood, so that when we draw a line on a chart or type a figure into a log, we are not reducing the sky so much as we are tracing the same journey at different scales, from footstep to road to route that leaves the map and continues into the dark beyond our porch. If sunlight loosens a hidden seam, then a faint breath slips through the fabric. If that breath finds a path, then the cloth of ice and dust gives a little, and the traveller answers with a soft recoil that can be felt only after many careful stitches of time. If the stitch holds, the nudge stays small. If the stitch frays, the nudge grows for a while, and then quiets again. The loosened seam tells its story without raising its voice. Heat doesn't stride, it soaks. It moves a shallow depth into the material before night pulls it back, like warmth travelling a finger's breadth under a quilt. This slow soak means the traveller's brightest face is not the exact noon of the sun, but a little past it, when the warmed layer has had time to work the seam and thin the crust. Where the weave is tight, gas lingers and presses. Where the weave is worn, gas escapes sooner and with less persuasion. The result is not a boil or a burst, but a steady unpicking that the orbit fitters later translate into a small term beside gravity's name. The loosened seam holds. I read the rotation like a tailor reading drape. The light rises and falls in a slight, repeatable way, as if a hem turns and shows first one side of the cloth, then the other. If outgassing tugs at the body the way a thread tugs at a sleeve, the spin can change by a touch, never dramatically, yet enough that many nights stitched together will show a different lay. The period we infer today might not be the one we infer next month, and that is not problem, but pattern, a quiet exchange between breath from the seam and the way the garment turns on its hanger. Tilt sets the seasons into the weave. A leaning axis means one hemisphere wears the day longer, another sits in shade, and then comes suddenly into favour. Where the day lingers, seams soften faster. Where the night holds, seams stay tight until the star climbs high. Activity follows the tailoring. Jets appear where the cloth is lit and slackening, then migrate with the changing angle as the traveller rounds its closest pass. The asymmetry does not accuse. It merely reveals how geometry chooses which panels of the coat will open first. The loosened seam moves along the lining. Jets feel like drawn threads. A narrow strand lifts from a specific patch and pulls, adding torque that shifts the collar just a little. The pull changes which seam faces the sun on the next turn, and this feedback, thread on collar, collar on thread, breeds a rhythm in the data. Some nights the thread is taut and visible. Other nights it blends back into the cloth and leaves only texture. Over spans of watching, that rhythm maps itself into the tiny sideways and sunward components the models prefer, so the predicted path can drape more naturally across the sky, instead of fighting the cut. Give the room a half-minute to breathe. The cooler purrs like air passing through linen. The dome slit is a neat opening, a hand width in the night. The keyboard halo is a fold of light on a wooden table. The pencil lies beside the pad like a pin along a seam. Outside, the air is clear and indifferent. Inside, the graphs rest, ready to be marked in a steady hand that does not hurry. We let the silence lie flat, without wrinkles or creases. Beneath the surface, the cloth is not solid. It is a layered batting with spaces where gas can gather. Those pockets are not mythic caverns. They are ordinary cavities in a gentle, porous matrix, and when a crack links a pocket to daylight, the pressure finds the opening and releases. A small vent can hold for many turns. A crusted vent can fail, then reseal under dust that settles like fine lint. In that open-close cycle, the seam behaves like a living hem, tightening, loosening, tightening again, and the traveller's push tilts accordingly until the piece finds a new balance. The loosened seam whispers beneath the outer cloth. All of this lands, eventually, in three small components a fitter can sew into the motion, one along the sun line, one along the traveller's way, one a little out of the orbital plane. The direction changes as the seam migrates with season and spin. The magnitude follows the day's length and the ease of the weave. Folded into the equations, these terms keep the ephemeris from puckering, smoothing the route so the next pointing finds the centre of the field, and the next, even as the garment keeps altering itself by tiny predictable acts of wear, so that the model and the night become two layers of the same coat, stitched together by patient hands and checked at each buttonhole for neatness and fit. When the star recedes and the warmth thins, the seam tightens again. The cloth cools, the breath weakens, the push eases back into the background that belonged to gravity all along. We will keep our notes tidy as the lining finds rest, and we will not press beyond what the fabric allows. That is enough for tonight. 3 handrails I keep beside the screen, each one a quiet line of light that steadies the view. First, the path is open. The eccentricity sits above 1, which means the curve through our sky does not close, and the sun's pull will not call this traveller back. I don't need fireworks to believe it. The plots that trace position against time unfold like a calm ribbon, and the fit that holds them together is the simple geometry of an unbound arc. This is not a slogan. It is a clean number that refuses a loop and accepts departure. When I mark it in the log, I feel the steady rail under my hand. Second, the glow is active. Around the nucleus, a small envelope blooms, soft as powdered light, and on good nights, a faint tail leans away from the sun with the obedience of dust to pressure. Some telescopes find a narrower thread inside the broad one, gas speaking in its own cleaner accent. Yet, even without that delicacy, the wide haze is enough to say daylight is working. The brightness rises with approach in a way that matches warmth, not wonder. The profile rounds on the sunward side and feathers on the far side. The field stars keep their points, while the visitor keeps its gentle blur. There is no need to exaggerate the scene. The presence of a coma is itself a complete sentence, and the sentence runs straight to the second handrail, firm and ordinary as a strip of light along a hallway. The steady rail holds. Third, the numbers prefer a small correction. Place the measured positions against the gravity-only map, and the differences are little, repeatable, and aimed in a way that says the glow has a slow breath. So we add a term that allows for that breath. A nudge aligned partly away from the sun, partly along the track, and sometimes a little above or below the plane. And we test whether tomorrow's prediction lands closer to the exact center of the next tiny circle. Because when it does, we learn that the simplest cause is working at the right scale. And the rail we follow is not a hope, but a guide lit by the object itself over many nights. With those 3 in place, open path, living coma, durable residuals, the story behaves. We do not have to push it toward drama or drag it back from rumor. We step from handrail to handrail in unhurried balance. Unbound status keeps the route honest. Activity explains the soft envelope and the tail. The persistent offsets justify a breath term in the fit without making a spectacle of it. If a night arrives when the residuals quiet, the models will relax with them. If a night brings a little more push, the update will listen and lean. What matters is not one measurement, but the repetition that allows confidence to grow the way dawn grows, luminance by luminance, until the field looks inevitable. The steady rail continues down the corridor. There are comforts here that belong to care. Each point we submit is anchored to a catalogue we trust. Each magnitude is touched into a standard band before it enters a curve. Each spectrum, when we have it, is checked against the instrument's own signatures, so we hear gas, not hardware. The 3 rails survive that careful housekeeping, and because they do, they are enough to keep us from slipping into either folklore or fuss. I keep them close as I read the night. Unbound curve, small living haze, gentle corrective term. They do not argue with one another. They make a small staircase of light that our attention can climb without strain, and at the top of those steps the sky looks back without surprise, waiting for the next entry to arrive in its calm, exact place. A soft green threads the image tonight, a faint ribbon that seems to breathe along the coma's curve. It doesn't shout. It only rests where the light is mildest, the way moss chooses the cool side of stone. I lean closer and let the hue become a guide. The green trace holds. There is a name for this colour that never needs to be spoken aloud to be real. It is the forbidden oxygen glow near 557 nanometers, born when sunlight breaks water and carbon dioxide into pieces, and a sliver of those atoms, briefly excited, return to quiet by releasing one small packet of green. That return happens often enough in a healthy coma to tint the center with a whisper of color that cameras and spectrographs can agree upon when the night is patient and the calibration keeps its promise. The green trace stays level in my hands. Other signatures mingle nearby. Carbon bands lay down a gentler green of their own, and cyanogen hums in the violet, while dust reflects a broad, neutral shine that is neither line nor chorus, only the sun's white spoken back in softer diction. When we split the light, the patterns fall into place. Bands where molecules sing, lines where atoms exhale, a sloping continuum where grains return daylight with their own small preferences. Through it all, the thin oxygen note keeps time like a metronome that only the eye can hear. The green trace steadies the pace. Distance matters to this colour. Closer to the sun, the light has more energy to free water and carbon dioxide, and the coma's heart becomes a busier workshop where short-lived parents feed short-lived children. Farther out, the same reactions thin with the light, and the green relents. The line strength also answers to how long those excited atoms can keep their breath before collisions quench them into silence, which is why the hue is richest, where the coma is thick enough to feed it, yet spare enough to let it finish its sentence. We watch for that balance, not as a prize, but as a way to read the chemistry's unhurried handwriting. Comparisons help, so I let memory carry me for a minute. One earlier visitor from another system wore its gases plainly, and in those spectra, the carbon and oxygen told a story that felt comfortingly familiar, even as ratios reminded us we were looking at a traveller with its own recipe. Tonight's object seems to speak a similar dialect. Water in the chorus, carbon dioxide, and perhaps carbon monoxide adding their parts. Yet, we keep the vocabulary cautious until more nights agree, and more instruments from other longitudes sing the same refrains. The point is not to match past comets beat for beat, but to let this one declare its own phrasing in green and grey. The green trace keeps us honest. Let the room become a palette for a while. The monitor dims toward a soft charcoal. The guiding stars settle into tiny pearls. The coma's center holds that wash of cool green. You only notice after you've looked away and returned. A notepad leans in the glow like paper under shallow water. The dome slit is a tall, dark brushstroke against a deeper black. Hands rest untense beside the keyboard, and the image idles without asking for thought. Nothing new is learned in this minute, and that is the point. Colour becomes calm, and calm becomes the space where patient seeing lives. Back at the spectrum, I prune the ways colour can mislead. Sensors love green more than they admit, so flat fields and standards are our antiphon to that bias. I subtract the reflected continuum with care, so that the line I call oxygen is not merely dust, speaking in an accent that suggests green to a hurried eye. A slit placed across the coma's centre shows the line most clearly. A slit that wanders into the tail leans toward dust and misses the core's language. Even the width of the slit matters, because a band that looks loud in a generous aperture can thin out when its light is forced into a narrow whisper. We are not hunting a miracle. We are listening for a single note in a patient chord, and the technique is simply how to keep the ear clean. Rotation adds a slow modulation. When a vent turns into daylight, the inner coma thickens with fresh fragments, and the oxygen line can thicken with it. When that vent slips back into local night, the line softens. Because green comes from short-lived states, the change feels local, centered near the nucleus, while other bands and the dust continuum can remember older minutes and blur the moment into average. Over an hour, a light wave in the green can echo in shallow undulations of brightness. Over a week, those undulations teach the rhythm of the body without ever needing a declaration in numbers. In that long patience, a model can add a small, seasonally aware breath term and step more surely into the next field. Nothing dramatic hides in this palette. The colour is a clue, not a flag. It says that sunlight and ice are holding their steady conversation, and that the coma is large enough to host it. When the line grows, we think of warmth and supply. When it fades, we think of distance and drift. If it shifts shape, we test whether the slit moved, the seeing changed, or a jet glanced our view. Even the green's balance against the carbon bands can help us imagine temperature and source, though we keep those imaginings gentle until the series is long and the calibrations nested. This is colour as a ledger, not a headline, and the ledger is written in unhurried hues. In the end, all the shades return to simple light. The nucleus turns, releases, rests, the coma thickens and thins. The spectrum answers in greens and near greens that hold their place on the page until distance takes them down again. I ease the saturation a notch and watch the center breathe. The green trace remains for a few long seconds, then thins toward a pale blue, almost a lullaby. We take a slow walk beside the curve, not to catch it, only to keep company as the bend in the path comes nearer, where warmth gathers and then lets go. The night knows how to pace this part. The clock learns to breathe between seconds. The field keeps its patient geometry, while the traveller leans toward the sun and prepares to round the nearest turn. The bend in the path is ahead, and our steps match it without haste. Dates help only as mileposts. Late October sits like a wooden stake along the roadside, a quiet sign that says the nearest approach to daylight has been passed, or is close enough to feel in the numbers. The distance is not a handshake with fire. It is a measured span, farther than the comets that skim past the heat in a frenzy, nearer than the outer roots where ice hardly stirs. I write the marker into the log because roads deserve their milestones, not because the world should brace. The bend in the path has a label, and then it has our attention. Heat follows the same itinerary every time. Radiance thickens with closeness, and the surface answers in steady, practical ways. More molecules step out, more dust joins the crowd, and the envelope grows denser in the inner yard before relaxing again after the turn. Production rates are our roadside count. How many water children per second? How many breaths of carbon? And while the exact tally wobbles with spin and seam, the trend is a simple walk upward toward the signpost and downward after it, with the stride length set by distance and daylight. We do not force the steps to be longer than they are. We let the traveller choose its own cadence. The bend accepts that courtesy. Risk is part of any journey, but we keep it in proportion. Some bodies soften as they warm and keep walking just the same. Others reveal a brittle patch that yields under pressure, and a piece may separate, the way a small stone rolls from the edge of a path without changing the direction of the road itself. I have seen cousins in the catalogue that unstitched themselves near their turn and faded early. I have also watched many that took the corner, shrugged the sunlight from their shoulders, and carried on into the distance. Here, the wise thing is to stay observant and spare of prediction. We prepare to see either steadiness or a brief shedding of fragments, not because we fear either outcome, but because a walker deserves to be seen as they are, not as a headline. Windows open and close along this route, and our pace adjusts. For a week, the object rides a span of pre-dawn hours, and our notes carry the scent of night. Then geometry shifts, and evening takes its turn, handing the baton from one hemisphere to the other so that gaps narrow, and the record feels like a single walk taken by many feet. Later still, the traveller sinks behind the sun from one vantage and rises into view from another, and the log reads like a relay across longitudes. Under such trading, predictions trimmed by a small breath term help us set up on time, so that the next exposure lands where the road says it will, and the next, while the bend slides by and the day begins to loosen its insistence. In that rhythm, a long sentence can leave the lips without strain, because each clause is only another step that follows the previous one, careful and unhurried, until the meaning reaches the same gentle turn the traveller is taking, and rests there for a while before continuing. The light on the path changes character as we pass the sign. Before the turn, brightness carries a forward lean. After, it softens by stages, like a slope, easing underfoot. Jets that had the advantage of noon begin to lose their long hours. Seams that slept begin to wake as the angles change. The fitted push that helped the model keep pace may rotate by a few quiet degrees as the body turns and the daylight falls differently across its face. None of this is dramatic, except to those who insist that every corner must be a cliff. This corner is a curve, and curves are meant to be walked. The bend in the path invites that calm. We stop sometimes and simply watch other travellers on the same road. The planets keep their circles, the stationary stars keep their backdrop, the thin tails of regular comets sketch familiar arcs that teach our eye what ordinary looks like, so we can see variation without making it sound like a breach. Against that quiet parade, the visitor's open route is obvious, but not defiant. It enters from elsewhere and will leave for elsewhere, and our job is only to count its steps, measure its breath, and keep the company of its turn. The bend does not belong to us. Our notes do, and we make them kind. Closer in, the chemistry writes its usual roadside messages. The green that visited our frames in earlier nights may thicken a little near the signpost, and then thin. The carbon bands may hold steady, and then ease. The continuum from dust will often lead the eye farther along the tail than the gas lines do, reminding us that grains keep the memory of earlier minutes as they fall behind the walker. A spectrum is a mile marker written in colour. A light curve is a series of shoe prints at measured intervals. An ephemeris is a map drawn from all the steps that came before, updated with the latest ones, so the next few can be taken without guesswork. Little by little, the bend becomes a place we know by memory rather than rumour. If a piece does part company, we will see it as a slight fattening of the envelope, a soft surge in dust, a temporary wobble in the centroid that smooths again as the new walkers take their own smaller paths away from the main body. Our models will measure that detour, borrow a term or two to keep the fit from tripping, and then the pace will settle again. If nothing parts, the log will be quieter still, and the worth of quiet is large on nights like these. We will still be here either way, walking in parallel and writing without embroidery. The bend in the path remains the same, whether we cross it with one companion or several. Soon enough, the signpost will be behind us. The traveller will angle toward the wide road between stars, where the sun's insistence thins and the breath term shrinks until gravity can keep the map without margins again. The coma will relax, the tail will slender down, the green, if it showed at all, will fade to a whisper our eyes can only summon with patience and favourable skies. We will keep writing, because the way out deserves as much witness as the way in, and because distance is not absence. It is only a longer stride between mile markers. The bend was a place, and then it was a place we passed, and then it was a page we can read again when needed. I pause at the edge of the next frame and rest my hand on the idea of a threshold. The path beyond is simple. Quieter nights, longer gaps, a curve that straightens as it leaves our neighbourhood. Nothing compels us to step through before we're ready. The doorway stands, and the road continues, and I let the moment hold us there. I want to write to you directly now, as if we were sharing the same desk light and the same quiet, and lay a small letter across the night. The way we speak about certainty matters, especially when the thing we're watching wears a pale veil that drifts and thins with distance. We can enjoy the beauty of the scene and still keep our words careful. Care is part of rest. When astronomers say a behaviour is confirmed, they mean it has settled like fog that refuses to lift after many mornings. Logs from different observatories agree. Reductions repeat under new eyes. The adopted orbit includes the extra terms and then predicts later positions more exactly than before. Until that point, the phrasing is gentler. Indications, hints, small residuals that persist. You'll see this caution in the circulars and bulletins that keep the shared book. Positions in coordinated universal time, uncertainties attached, methods declared, and the notes holding a neutral tone that lets the evidence condense at its own pace. JPL's tables and the Minor Planet Center's updates move this way on purpose, so conclusions don't swirl faster than the data can settle. The pale veil stays in place while we wait for the air to clear. Patience is easiest when you know how the effort is arranged. Professional telescopes contribute long exposures, spectra, and precise timings. Well-calibrated amateur instruments fill the calendar gaps that would otherwise open like low valleys between hills. Submissions arrive in a standard format. Fitters fold them into solutions. If a tiny self-push improves tomorrow's pointing, it remains in the model, and if it does not, the term evaporates and the curve returns to gravity alone. None of this is dramatic. The shared goal is a clean sky map and predictions that guide the next night without fuss. Across continents, the campaign feels like a cool field at dawn, everything beaded with small droplets of work, each one clear enough to reflect the same truth when you lean close. Language is a tool we keep polished. Words like impossible or mystery make steam where none is needed, while phrases like consistent with outgassing or improves residuals let understanding breathe. And inside the notes we trade, you'll find that brevity carries more weight than drama, because a single line, date, offset, uncertainty, travels farther than a paragraph of heat. And over weeks, these cool, exact entries form a surface where patterns appear. Not because we press them there, but because they emerge as the moisture of many nights gathers into a shape that will not blow away with the first shift of wind. A shape we can finally call confirmed without raising our voice. I know it can be tempting to ask the sky to speak quickly, to demand that the veil part on our schedule. But the softness of this work is part of its strength. We keep looking, we keep writing, we let careful groups review the same numbers and reply in their own time. If a term earns its place, it stays. If it doesn't, the page remains clean. Either way, the night holds. You can let your shoulders drop here. The sky does too. Night holds the lab like a harbour at slack tide. The fans keep their steady breeze through the racks. The dome slit narrows to a careful seam against the sky, and a mug gone cool sits beside the logbook. One monitor shows the last frame of the night. Another lists times and coordinates like buoys set out along a channel. I make one more pass through the notes, then rest the pencil where the page will remember it. In this hour, the work feels like guiding a small vessel through a wide quiet, and the wake behind us thins as the water closes. The receding wake begins. The outbound leg is underway. The curve in the ephemeris has already softened. The heliocentric distance climbs by careful steps. The fits no longer require our most alert pointing to catch the target. We aren't losing it so much as letting it take the deeper water beyond the shelf where our coastlights reach. An unbound path means just that. The sun's hold is a courteous influence for a while, and then a memory. The velocity that once promised escape now keeps its promise without ceremony. I note the hour, write the expected change in brightness, and feel the small lift of calm that comes when a crossing clears the breakwater and settles into steadier swells. The receding wake lengthens. Data has its own voyage once the dome closes. I stage the astrometry in the format the bookkeepers expect. Tuck spectra into their folders with calibration files nested alongside, and let the photometry rest in a curve that will accept more points tomorrow. Copies sail to the places that keep charts for the rest of us, the centers that adopt, archive, and publish, the tables that hold elements as they improve, the catalogues that pair each number with its uncertainty so no one steers by wish. On longer timescales, repositories gather the raw exposures themselves, preserving the star fields around our target so that years from now, someone can reprocess the same night with better tools and measure the same water under a calmer hull. When I look across the years rather than the hours, I see 3 crossings layered like roots on a translucent map. The first was small and spare, a hull with little spray, leaving a track that leaned off the gravity chart by a whisper no camera could anchor to a plume. The second wore its water openly, bright and self-explanatory, and taught us the comfort of a textbook passage arriving from another ocean. This third cuts between, spray visible in the light, and a small, steady lean that asks to be modelled with a breath term so the track and the chart agree. None of these ask us to declare a new sea. Together, they simply widen the known lanes between stars. There is a kindness in what we learned this season. The small push that follows from daylight on volatile seams can be described and fitted without fuss. The dust's road answers to particle size and light's pressure. The palette of gases speaks when we listen with patient instruments. And the shared log lets many pilots describe the same current without colliding in words. I stack these reminders like coiled lines on the bay, ready for the next departure, easy to lift when called for, not tangled with claims we cannot keep. Some nights, planning sneaks in like a tide. I pull up survey forecasts and see the wide-net projects that will comb the sky with a regularity we could only guess at a decade ago. Deeper reach, broader swath, quicker revisits. Those are the new currents. They will set more small wakes across our charts, and each will arrive with its own chemistry and pace. We may even design a ready craft to meet a future crosser mid-ocean, a quick dispatch that can match speed and take a closer sound of the hull before the path escapes the range of our shore stations. The prospect is less a promise than a bearing, a course we can hold until the instruments confirm it is time to turn. Give the room a minute to drift. The cooler hum is a soft swell. The relay clicks are the distant slap of water on pilings. The cable loop over the bench is a coiled rope at rest. The red diode is a harbour light that never hurries. Somewhere far beyond roof lines, our traveller is already riding into quieter lanes, the spray behind it falling into smaller ripples that spread, fade, and are welcomed by water that forgets nothing and repeats nothing. I let the screen dim one notch and keep my hands still. Ambience settles like evening wind that turns in place without pushing. There is still a little housekeeping aboard before sleep. I check the residuals after the new fit. A long track term relaxes a touch. The away from sun component pivots by a degree that matches the new daylight across the seams. The normal term remains modest and content to be modest. The pointing plan for tomorrow moves by arc seconds rather than arc minutes. I jot a short note to the next shift, a gentle line about the brightness trend and the comfort of the latest spectrum. We do not force the pace of this outbound leg. We trim to it, and the trimming is its own craft. Lessons from the warehouse of the night. That patience beats proclamation. That a chart is written on a desk but tested at sea. That shared notes are more seaworthy than solitary ones. That a wake is a report, not a language of intent. Each of the 3 crossings we have known has extended our shoreline by a small measure, and together they make the horizon feel less like a limit and more like a route. In the years ahead, more hulls will pass, and some we may meet with ships of our own. Until then, the best work is the same work: quiet piloting, honest entries, and a willingness to let the water close where it must. I save the files, close the shutter, and listen for the change in the room when the wind outside finds its new direction. A long road of dark water runs outward from our coast. On it, the faint glow we watched all season is now a thin line laid down behind a departing stern, and even as it thins, it keeps telling us where it has been, and how steady the hand on the tiller needed to be to see it clearly, which is to say not steady as stone, but steady as a heart rate eased by trust and practice. The chorus of machines rests to a murmur. The night writes its last line. The receding wake returns, softer than before. Thank you for keeping watch with me tonight. We traced a quiet visitor that came from another neighborhood, its path unbound and simple. Eccentricity above one told us the curve would not close. The sun would guide, then release. We listened instead of chasing. We saw a small envelope around the nucleus, a living coma that thickened with warmth. A tail leaned away from daylight, dust accepting the soft press of light. On patient nights, gas lines wrote their names in color: cyanogen and violet, carbon bands near green, and a faint oxygen note at the center. The palette stayed honest. Numbers carried kindness too. Positions anchored to a trusted catalogue, times kept in UTC, residuals compared across nights. Where gravity alone fell short by a whisper, a breath term helped the fit walk in step. No spectacle. Only a better map for tomorrow's pointing. Late October marked the near turn by the sun. The distance was measured, not peril. Activity rose, then began to ease, and the room remembered how to breathe. If fragments came, they would fatten the glow and settle. If not, the curve would soften anyway. Either way, we kept company. Across recent years, they have learned from 3 crossings layered like thin pages. One left a lean track without a clear plume. One wore its gases plainly and behaved like our familiar comets. This one sat between, a visible spray with a small, steady lean that modelling could welcome without fuss. None demanded drama. All widened the lanes between stars. We set the data on their voyages, astrometry to the keepers, spectra to their folders, light curves to their lines. Others will read them in their own calm. Together, they make a ledger of simple truths. You were here for the steady parts, the field that held still, the instruments that spoke in low voices, the sky that asked for patience and repaid it with clarity. Let your shoulders drop one more time. Let the night close the door gently behind you. Sleep well, traveler. Good night.